I'll teach you how to destroy any argument with the 5 whys rule. Most people believe winning a debate is about having more knowledge, without imposing or being faster. But the truth is the opposite. Whoever makes the other person doubt themselves wins. Socrates proved this when he defeated all the masters of Greece without ever asserting anything. Machiavelli will teach us when to apply it, and Aristotle will show where to attack. This technique was tested in real debates and worked 3 out of 4 times. Stay with us because in 20 minutes, you'll learn this complete method, step by step, ready to use today. The human brain has a factory defect. Every time someone asserts something, the other person's mind automatically searches for errors, for gaps, for reasons to disagree. It's a defense mechanism that activates in milliseconds. You can bring absolute truth to your lips, present irrefutable evidence, and still face resistance. The problem was never the strength of the argument. Asserting is attacking, and every attack generates defense. Reverse the logic. Questioning completely changes how the mind processes information. The person doesn't seek to defend, they seek to respond. And by responding, they expose. They reveal the premises that support their beliefs, show the fragile connections between ideas, lay bare the contradictions they didn't even notice. Socrates mastered this walking the streets of Athens. He saw sophists convincing crowds with elaborate speeches and asked a simple question. Just one. He waited for the answer loaded with certainty. Second question. The certainty wavered. On the third, the person was already doubting. On the fifth, the entire argument collapsed. Debates are lost trying to prove you're right, when they should make the person prove to themselves they're wrong. That's the playing field. It's not showing knowledge, it's exposing gaps. It's not imposing truth, it's revealing cracks in someone else's logic. These cracks always exist, hidden in the invisible premises that support any belief. Every argument rests on assumptions the person doesn't question anymore, accepts as truth and stops examining, becomes automatic. Forcing explanation of what never needed explaining makes the argument lose strength on its own. Ignoring this costs dearly. It means continuing to lose debates you should win, spending energy trying to convince those who've already decided not to be convinced, accumulating frustration because truth isn't enough. Facts aren't enough. Logic isn't enough when everything comes pre-chewed. The promise is direct. In 20 minutes, you master a method that transforms any debate. 5 questions that dismantle arguments, without shouting, without imposing, without attacking, just questioning until the foundations give way. But there's a mistake 9 out of 10 people make when trying to win a debate, and this mistake guarantees defeat before it even begins. The mistake is simple but fatal. You attack the conclusion when you should be unearthing the premise. Think of an iceberg. The visible part is small, impressive, draws attention, but 90% of the mass is submerged, invisible, supporting everything. The instinct is to go for the top, for the conclusion the person shouts with conviction. Confront that statement directly, bring contrary data, opposing arguments, proof they're wrong. The more you prove, the more they resist, because you're only attacking what shows, ignoring the submerged mass that supports everything. Debates become information combat. One person throws a fact, the other responds with another fact. Nobody retreats, nobody yields. It becomes a tug of war where both sides pull with full force and nobody moves. This happens for a specific reason. Identity. Every time someone publicly asserts something, that assertion sticks to the image they have of themselves. It stops being just an idea and becomes an extension of personality. Attacking the idea becomes attacking who they are. The resistance doesn't come from logic. It comes from ego survival. You can be absolutely right. You can be defending the obvious. You'll still lose because the other isn't defending the argument. They're defending their own identity. The reaction is visceral, not rational. The body releases cortisol, the brain enters threat mode, and all contrary information is filtered as personal attack. In this state, no matter how much proof you present, the mind will reject, will distort, will find ways to keep the original belief intact. Every conclusion rises upon premises. They're the invisible beliefs, the assumptions the person doesn't even know they carry. They look at the world through these filters and think they see pure reality. They're seeing interpretation. Attacking the conclusion leaves these filters in place. The person reconstructs the argument using the same premises and arrives at exactly the same point. Endless cycle. You knock down the argument, they rebuild. You knock it down again, they rebuild again. The invisible structure remains firm, feeding everything. Socrates discovered how to completely reverse this, and his method brought down all the masters of Athens without him asserting a single time that he was right. Socrates never said you're wrong, but everyone who debated with him left knowing they were. He didn't write books, didn't give lectures, didn't set up schools like the sophists did. He simply walked the streets of Athens and talked. He approached the masters, the politicians, the citizens who thought themselves wise, and began with an innocent question. Always the same structure, always the same result. The technique was brutal in its simplicity. Someone asserted something with conviction. Socrates didn't counter-argue. He asked for definition. The person explained. He refined the definition, asked for clarity on the terms. The person adjusted the answer. He pressed again, showing where the new definition created problems. Suddenly the person was defending the opposite of what they'd asserted at the start. Not because Socrates proved they were wrong, because they discovered the contradiction themselves. What he did was force explanation of what never needed explaining. Most beliefs aren't born from reasoning, they're born from repetition. Hear something enough, accept it as truth, stop questioning, becomes automatic. When Socrates asked for definition, asked for refinement, asked for clarity, the person discovered they didn't have it. They had certainty but no foundation. The argument collapsed on its own. Plato documented several of these dialogues. In one, Socrates talks with Euthyphro about piety. Euthyphro asserts with total conviction he knows what's pious. Socrates asks for definition. Euthyphro says pious is what the gods love. Socrates refines, do the gods love it because it's pious, or is it pious because the gods love it? Euthyphro tries to answer, and realizes both options create contradiction. By the end of the dialogue, Euthyphro flees the conversation, unable to define what he was absolutely certain he knew. He was condemned to death for this. The Athenians accused him of corrupting the youth. In truth, he exposed the ignorance of the powerful. This is intolerable when power depends on the illusion of wisdom. But the method survived. The structure is always progressive. Doesn't go straight to the contradiction. Builds layers. Question 1, the person answers. Question 2 refines the answer. Question 3 exposes the first problem. Question 4 amplifies the problem. Question 5 forces the choice. Either admit the contradiction or defend the indefensible and lose credibility alone. In both cases, you won without asserting anything. Socrates' method is powerful, but used at the wrong moment can blow up in your face. Machiavelli observed when people are open and when they're shielded. Machiavelli realized the same questioning can make you dominate or make you lose control. It all depends on when you use it. He spent years observing power games in Florence, saw ambassadors negotiating, princes manipulating, advisors persuading. He discovered a pattern. It wasn't the strongest argument that won. It was the argument delivered at the right moment. There's a mental state that makes a person permeable to questioning. They're doubting, even if they won't admit it. They're generalizing, using vague terms, speaking with conviction but without precision. That's the signal. Hearing always, never, everyone, nobody indicates fragile foundation. The person is building on sand. That's when you enter with the question. Not to attack, to expose. Always, without any exception. You're not disagreeing, you're asking for clarity. The person wanting to maintain authority will try to explain, will dig deeper. Each explanation exposes more fragility. But there's the opposite. Emotional person, dogmatic, defending identity instead of idea. In this state, questioning becomes fuel. They won't reflect, they'll attack back. They'll interpret your question as provocation. The debate becomes war. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince about this. Never force change in someone emotionally invested in their current position. You lose the debate and gain an enemy. Retreat. Let time cool the emotion. Return later when the guard is down. The power of questioning is in silent control, doesn't impose, directs. Each question is an arrow pointing to contradiction, but the person thinks they're conducting the reasoning, thinks they're explaining, clarifying, proving the point, doesn't realize each answer is a rope. used to tie their own argument. On the last squeeze, on the final question, they pull the rope themselves, and the knot closes. Machiavelli taught that persuasion isn't about convincing. It's about making the person convince themselves. Plant the doubt, water it with questions, wait. Their mind does the rest. When they change their mind, they think it was their own decision. They'll never admit they were influenced, and that's perfect because admitting influence generates resentment. Those who think they decided alone remain open. Now you know what to ask and when to ask, but the most important thing is still missing: where to attack. Aristotle mapped the 3 weak points of any argument. Aristotle discovered every argument has the same anatomy: premise, connection, and conclusion. Attack the conclusion and you lose. Attack the premise and it crumbles on its own. He spent decades studying logic, cataloging fallacies, mapping how human reasoning works and where it fails. He arrived at a discovery that changed debates forever. Every argument strong on the surface hides fragility at the base. The structure is always the same. Someone starts from a premise, makes a logical connection, reaches a conclusion. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, perfect in form. But most everyday arguments don't have this perfection. They skip steps, generalize, assume truths they haven't proven. It's in these leaps where vulnerability lives. The first weak point is the untested premise. The person starts assuming something as absolute truth, but never proved it. Successful people wake up early, so you need to wake up early to succeed. The conclusion seems logical, but the premise is flawed. Not all successful people wake up early, and even if they did, that doesn't prove waking up early causes success. Could be correlation, not causation. Questioning the premise, asking the person to prove the base, makes the entire argument waver. The second weak point is the logical leap. The person connects two ideas that don't necessarily connect. The government raised taxes and the economy worsened, so taxes destroy the economy. Could be true, could be coincidence. Could be the economy was already worsening and the tax increase was consequence, not cause. Aristotle called this the false dilemma fallacy, where cause and effect are assumed without proof. Pointing out the leap, asking for clear connection, makes the person stumble. The third weak point is absolute generalization. Nobody trusts politicians sound strong, but one contrary example dismantles it, and contrary examples always exist. Aristotle knew, the more absolute the statement, the more fragile it is. The burden of proof is total. The person needs to prove that in 100% of cases this is true. You only need one contrary case to bring it all down. The map is clear. Weak premise, logical leap, generalization. 3 entry doors. Identify which is open and enter with questioning. Now you have Socrates' method, Machiavelli's timing, and Aristotle's map. Time to integrate everything in the 5 whys rule, the key that opens any argument. The 5 whys rule integrates the 3 principles in a lethal sequence. Each question has a specific function, and on the 5th why, the person's argument crumbles in their own hands. It's not about asking 5 random questions. It's about asking the 5 right questions, in the right sequence with the right purpose. Each one unearths a deeper layer. When you reach the bottom, nothing remains. First, why applies Socrates asking for definition? The person asserts something. You ask them to define the main term. You said this is unfair. What exactly do you mean by unfair? Seems innocent, seems curious, but you're forcing them to transform feeling into logic. Most convictions are born from emotion, not reasoning. When you ask for definition, the person realizes they don't have a clear one. Second why continues with Socrates refining. They gave a vague definition. You ask for specificity. So unfair is when someone is harmed without reason. And if the person was harmed but there was reason, is it still unfair? You're closing the gaps. You're forcing precision. Each refinement exposes more fragility. Third, why brings Machiavelli controlling? Here you identify if the person is open or defensive. If they start generalizing, using always and never, you press. Always without exception, even in different contexts. If they get emotional, you retreat and reformulate with a more neutral tone. Timing determines if you advance or pause. Fourth, why uses Aristotle attacking the premise? You already have the definition. Already refined, already controlled. Now you go to the base. You said unfair is harming without reason. But how do you know there was no reason? Do you know all the variables? The person will try to defend, will bring examples. Each example they bring you test against their own logic. Fifth why finishes with Aristotle exposing the contradiction. So, by your own definition, the example you gave isn't unfair, it's just unpleasant. You're calling injustice something that doesn't fit the definition you yourself created. Game over. They contradicted themselves using their own ruler. Usage trigger. When someone asserts something with conviction but vague foundation. Hit signal. The person stops asserting and starts pondering. Critical limit. If they admit doubt, you stop. Continuing becomes cruelty. But every persuasion technique has a blind spot, an ethical risk that can destroy you if you don't know how to avoid it. The difference between using this technique with mastery or becoming an exposed manipulator is knowing three limits most people ignore. The first limit is intention. Are you questioning to reveal truth or to humiliate? The technique works in both cases, but the final result is opposite. Questioning to expose truth makes the person resist at first, but deep down they feel you're helping them think better. Questioning to destroy, they feel it. And even if you win the debate, you lose the relationship. Socrates was condemned to death because the powerful felt humiliation, not enlightenment. The technique was the same, but the intention overflowed. The second limit is knowing when to stop. The person started doubting, started pondering, started questioning their own certainties. This is the moment to stop, not to press more. Continuing rubbing the contradiction in their face makes pride take control. They'll close up, retreat to the original position, hate you for having exposed the fragility. Machiavelli knew true persuasion happens when the person thinks they reach the conclusion alone. Plant, water, and exit the scene before the harvest. Let them harvest. Let them think it was their own merit. The third limit is context. There are debates that aren't worth the technique. Emotional discussions, family conflicts, situations where the relationship matters more than reason. In these cases, questioning can be technically correct and humanly destructive. Aristotle differentiated practical wisdom from theoretical wisdom. Knowing when to use is as important as knowing how to use. Now you're no longer someone who tries to win debates by shouting louder or accumulating more facts. You're a strategic questioner. Someone who understands that real persuasion happens when you make the person doubt their own premises, not when you impose yours. You carry Socrates' method, Machiavelli's timing, Aristotle's precision. And you know the power isn't in asserting, it's in asking. The ritual is simple. Before the next debate, ask yourself a question. Do I want to win or do I want to reveal truth? If the answer is win at any cost, don't use the technique. You'll win the debate and lose something bigger. If the answer is truth, then use it. And use it knowing that on the fifth why, you're not destroying an argument. You're freeing a mind. Now you master the strategic questioning technique. But there's another principle these three philosophers used to control conversations without anyone noticing. Click the video on screen now to discover what this invisible persuasion weapon is.